Hello and welcome to this teaching on reimagining public safety in San Leandro. My name's Joel and I'm a 20-year resident in San Leandro.
And my name's Pam. I'm also a longtime resident here in San Leandro. We're thrilled today to have both Spanish and ASL interpretation. We want to welcome Pamela, our ASL interpreter. Hi, Pamela. And Rodrigo is our Spanish interpreter. If you need Spanish interpretation, there's a little globe at the bottom of your screen. Just click on interpretation and turn it to Spanish. Okay, so let's get started. What we're hoping to do today is learn about a variety of issues related to public safety in our city. We want to spend some time looking at how we're spending our money here in San Leandro, how police spend their time and resources, and the relationship between policing and community safety. And finally, ideas that are already happening and processes at work, both here in San Leandro as well as beyond our city. I want to note that we are providing a lot of information today, and we won't have time for a live Q&A, but we do encourage you to use the chat box to send any questions to us, which will go to the organizers only and not the public. We can try to answer those questions in future events or via email or social media.
Before we get started, I do want to name that as residents in San Leandro, we all sit on unceded ancestral land of the Chochenyo-speaking Lishan Ohlone people. And as such, we want to encourage you to consider donating to the Segurite Land Trust as a way to honor the fact that these lands were taken from indigenous communities and recognize that indigenous people are flourishing members of the broader Bay Area community.
Also, before we begin, I wanted to give recognitions to James Birch for the amazing research he has done on this topic. We not only used his webinars as a guide for ours, but also most of the research in this presentation that is not San Leandro based is based on his hard work. So thank you to James. So you may be wondering who is putting this webinar on. We represent a group of community members who are looking to reimagine public safety. We want to examine how we might shift resources from policing to various community services. And we are a group that prioritizes racial equity to ensure the well-being and security of all members of our community. We also want to be clear about who we are not. We are not representative of any one group working for change here in San Leandro. Also, we are not anti-police. We recognize the incredibly difficult job police officers are asked to do, and in fact, are concerned about the things they're being asked to do for which they're not trained. And finally, we're not promoting any one single vision to improve the issues that we're facing. We want to share this basic information and hope that we can come up with solutions together as a community going forward.
We want to begin by defining some terms. A lot of people really struggle with the idea of defunding the police and often don't understand what it means. We also want to talk about the definition of safety. What do we mean when we say that? Let's take a look at these clips from Alicia Garza and Karen Bass discussing defunding and community safety.
So in this case, when it comes to policing, I just have to be honest, like, the reason that things are so bad in policing is because we ask police to do things that they shouldn't be doing. We are asking police to be domestic violence counselors. We're asking police to be therapists. We're asking police to deal with people who are in crisis in terms of their mental health. And police are not trained to do that. But we also have people whose actual profession it is to do that work. And the reason that we don't have enough of those people in our community is not because we don't have enough trained people. It's actually because we have had government that has whittled away that safety net. We've had government that has whittled away that infrastructure in our communities, and they've replaced it, right, with control and surveillance, which actually ends up exacerbating the problem. And so if you actually limit what police do in our communities, and how often they come into contact with our people and for what. That is actually the key to saving more lives, as long as you also invest on the other side in making sure that there is a robust set of resources that people can access, that they won't be criminalized for accessing, but also where you don't have the option for a mistake of trying to deal with a mental health crisis and you shoot someone, right? Therapists don't carry guns, right? They have other tools that they use.
Police officers are the first ones to say that they are law enforcement officers, they're not social workers. What we have done in our country is we have not invested in health, social, and economic problems in communities, and we leave the police to pick up the pieces. So one of the main points that I believe the quote unquote defund movement is making is that cities and states, their priorities are lopsided. So a large percentage of the city budget goes to law enforcement. They're saying, why doesn't the city deal with its social problems? So not so much money would have to go to law enforcement.
But I can say, just to make a quick parallel, that in the same way that people would tell us now to change the slogan of defund the police to make the police better or transform the police or whatever, people told us this also in 2013 and said, well, how can you make your slogan more appealing to people like me? And I'm really glad that we didn't change our slogan to All Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter too. We've got to be able to, as a part of the reckoning that this moment is offering us, we have to be able to sit with the discomfort of the shifts that we are being asked to make right now.
When we talk about defunding the police, we're talking about not abolishing police or getting rid of the police entirely altogether right now. We're talking about how money is allocated to our police department, and instead looking at ways we can just redistribute it and use it more effectively in other departments.
We hear from many people, they don't like the term defund the police. They say it's too radical and, quite frankly, frightens them because they think, what will we do without police? As the video pointed out, that's not what it means at all. However, let's not let a term stop us from thinking about and listening to discussions about these issues. Those of us who identify as white people also need to be careful about dismissing this term. We need to be careful about saying, I'll listen to you if you say it differently, which really implies I'll listen to you if you ask nicely. And we must never lose sight of just how high the stakes of this conversation really are.
I understand that people don't like the slogan. I get that, but I don't like death. I don't like Black death. I don't like to keep seeing my people die at the hands of police and nothing is happening. I don't like that. So I think I can't care about people's feelings. I can't care about, what, if you like what I'm saying or not. My people are dying, and that's what I have to look at.
We also need to acknowledge that this term, like it or not, has created a great deal of discussion about the topic of policing in our country, a conversation which has failed to capture the national attention until now, which is the ultimate goal. All of that being said, there are other terms that communicate the same principles that can be used to help frame the concept. Here are just a few examples. Reallocate resources, rethink budgets, invest in community, reimagine safety, and invest, divest. But please, however you frame the conversation, let's not let the terms get in the way of your ability to listen to these important issues and our ability to think together about solutions. Next, we want to spend some time looking at just how we spend our money in San Leandro. And just to note, the figures from all the following slides are taken from the adopted budgets of the City Council, which are published each year and are found on the City of San Leandro website. Just warning you in advance, we're going to go through quite a few statistics in the next few minutes, but bear with us as these numbers paint the picture about how we spend our money and how much of that money goes towards policing and not towards other departments. And make no mistake about it, how we choose to spend our money speaks volumes about what we value in our community. Now, our budget is divided into two types of funding: general funds and restricted funds. Our total budget is $190.8 million. 37% of this are restricted funds. That is $70.5 million. 63% of the total budget is what we call the general fund. That general fund amounts to $120.3 million. Now, restricted funds are non-discretionary. They are not subject to vote by the city council, and they are mostly bills that San Leandro is required to pay. They are pretty much set in stone. The general fund, on the other hand, is discretionary, meaning it is the money that our city council has control over, and they vote on how to spend these funds each year. The general fund is what pays for the basic operations of the city. This is the section of the budget that represents about 2/3 of the entire budget, and more importantly, is the portion of the budget that we can actually influence. For the rest of this presentation, we will be talking only about the general fund, as that is what we can work to change. Now let's look more specifically at the San Leandro Police Department budget. As you can see from this chart, SLPD receives more than 1/3 of the general fund. So that means that 35% of all of the discretionary funding in San Leandro goes to the police department. That is a huge percentage, and we'll see in this next section how that compares to what other departments receive in funding in San Leandro. And so we understand almost all of the SLPD budget comes from this general fund. 99%. That's 42 million of the $42.3 million of the police budget are from the general fund. This is essentially the entire SLPD budget, and thus we have influence over all of this money. Now let's look at the breakdown of the general fund and how much of it the police are being given compared to some of the other departments. This is a visual of how we're spending our money. And you can see police are receiving more funding by a significant amount in our city than any other department. Police get 35% of the general fund, whereas Recreation and Human Services only gets 4%, Public Works gets 6%, Engineering and Transportation gets 3%, Libraries get 5%, the Fire Department gets 22%, and Community Development gets 6%. In fact, if you look at the San Leandro Police Department budget, you will see that the expenditures for the police exceed all of the following departments combined: Public Works, Community Development, Library Services, General Government, Recreation and Human Services, Engineering and Transportation, and Finance. In other words, we spend more on our police than anything else in our city. These next two slides give us another visual of the uneven breakdown of the general fund and how much more funding goes to police than to these other departments. This is an over expenditure on police compared to virtually every other aspect of our community's needs. Not only that, the San Leandro Police Department budget has increased 66% in 9 years, from $25.3 million in the 2012-2013 fiscal year to $42 million this year, projected for this year.
We also know that police are very expensive employees. Here, we're going to show you some of the average compensation packages for police officers in San Leandro. And please note, this is just the average police officer, not our captains or sergeants or chiefs who even receive more. What you're looking at is an average pay of more than $113,000. overtime pay of nearly $29,000, and an additional pay of $23,500 in other forms of salary. So total average pay comes to more than $165,000. Add to that their benefits of almost $96,000, and you have a total compensation package of $261,000. Now, of course, these are just averages. Some officers make a bit more, some make less. But also note that in addition to their salary, think about all of the equipment police officers require to do their jobs, such as weapons and uniforms, patrol cars, along with an incredibly complex infrastructure that's expensive to support them. We have to wonder, would a social worker cost this much? We don't have those figures, however, since the city of San Leandro doesn't employ social workers. As we saw on the last slide, police officers receive great benefits, and it's better than every other department in the city. These lines represent the ratio of benefits to salaries for different departments. The red line shows that police receive a benefits package worth another 80% on top of their base salaries. As you see here, every other department is significantly lower, ranging from approximately 40 to 65%. So to illustrate what this means, let's compare a benefits package for the police versus another city employee. Someone working in library services who earns $100,000 a year would receive benefits worth approximately $50,000 above their salaries, whereas a police officer also earning $100,000 would receive a benefits package worth nearly $80,000. Now let's take a look at overtime. As you saw on the salary chart, the average salary for a police officer is roughly $113,000, and overtime is nearly $29,000. That represents 25.4% on top of their base pay. It's also important to recognize that no other department gets this much overtime. Here we see how much overtime each department received over the past 5 years. The lines at the bottom, which are hardly detectable, represent every department listed on the chart except the police. And here we see the overtime totals for the police. And also, let's not forget that this year's scandal involving Sergeant Robert Sanchez had everything to do with overtime. The conclusion is clear. Police have high salaries, expensive benefits, and unlike any other department, they collect significant overtime. Police cost San Leandro a lot of money.
So you would think that all of this money would at least produce less crime. But there's a common misconception embedded in this spending pattern that we must address. The idea that more money spent on policing equals less crime. Well, that is simply not true. We know this is not true nationally. For example, COPS was a program under the 1994 crime bill, which gave $7.6 billion to state and local communities to hire police officers. This quote is from a report done by the U.S. Government Accountability Office when they were asked to study the effectiveness of this incredible police spending on crime.
Between 1993 and 2000, COPS funds contributed to a 1.3% decline in the overall crime rate and a 2.5% decline in the violent crime rate from the 1993 levels. Factors other than COPS funds accounted for the majority of the decline in crime during this period.
So not only is this not true nationally, it's also not true here in San Leandro. You'll recognize the chart on the left from earlier, showing the 66% increase in the police budget over the last 9 years. Now look at the chart on the right. This chart shows the total crime numbers in San Leandro. You can see that even though the SLPD budget increased 66%, there was only an overall reduction in crime those same 9 years of 13%. And as you can see here, it wasn't even a steady decline. From year to year, crime has gone up and down over the same period of time. A second misconception is that we are facing waves of crime and crime is increasing. Again, this is simply not true. Nationally, these are the trends that we've seen in terms of both violent and property crimes. These graphs show data about violent crimes and property crimes from 1993 to 2019 from both the FBI and the Bureau of Justice Statistics. You can see both types of crime have plunged according to both sources of data. What about crime here in San Leandro? As we already have seen, here is the chart of crime totals taken from the crime analysis page of the San Leandro website. These figures represent the most serious type of crime. The graph shows crime numbers are quite variable over the years, going up and down, with an overall decrease of 13% since 2012. In essence, crime has remained more or less steady in San Leandro.
Now let's take a look more carefully at what police are doing with their time. Here you can see some national data about how police spend their hours. If you look at the small green section at the bottom of the chart where the arrow is pointing, you'll see just 4% of police officers' time is devoted to violent crime. Half or more of their time is spent responding to non-criminal calls and responding to traffic issues. Many people have the idea that if we get rid of police, violence will suddenly skyrocket. Well, that just doesn't make sense if they're only spending 4% of their time dealing with violent crime in the first place. And we could assume that part of their time is devoted to actually solving crimes. Well, it is certainly what they do on TV. So let's look at how effective our police department has been in solving crimes. As you can see here, for both violent crime and property crime, clearance rates have decreased significantly from 2010 to 2019. What we have to acknowledge is that police do not prevent crime. They respond to it. I don't think any of us would argue that the fact is there are very few situations in which police intervene and stop crimes in progress. Rather, they typically respond to crimes after they have taken place. And as we just saw in their clearance rates, their ability to solve these crimes seems to be decreasing pretty significantly in San Leandro. We have to ask ourselves, are we getting our money's worth? What is this investment giving San Leandro? Are we really getting what we're paying for? In the last decade or so, our budget for the police department has gone up dramatically. During this same period, crime totals have gone up and down, with certainly a modest decline overall. And finally, clearance rates of these crimes have also significantly gone down. You do the math.
So to be clear, spending money on police does not prevent or reduce crime, nor does it increase public safety. Not only are we not getting our money's worth, unfortunately, for many in our community, it's quite the opposite, and police are having a negative impact. For instance, contact with police can make things worse, especially when that contact is with
Our findings reveal that being stopped or arrested not only increases future delinquency, but also amplifies deviant attitudes.
And we also know that when it comes to calls related to mental health, police interaction can result in serious harm. Here you can see that people with untreated serious mental illness are 16 times more likely to be killed during a law enforcement encounter than other civilians. 1 in 4 fatal law enforcement encounters involves an individual with serious mental illness. And in fact, people with serious mental illnesses are 10 times more likely to be incarcerated in a state prison than to receive any treatment in a state hospital. Imagine if a trained social worker or therapist responded to mental health calls instead of an armed police officer. Imagine them talking to a person in crisis down and sitting next to them instead of throwing them on the ground and sitting on top of them. How would these outcomes be different? And how much less would it cost in both money and lives? Our police are simply being asked to handle situations they are not prepared for. Tragically, we know this to be true in the murder of Stephen Taylor on April 18th, 2020. Within just 40 seconds of encountering Stephen on the scene in Walmart, Officer Jason Fletcher murdered him. And then Officer Overton tased Stephen after he was already fatally wounded by the gunshot. This was as shameful and tragic as it was unnecessary. We also know that these issues aren't just happening here in San Leandro, nor are they in the past. These are just two headlines from the past couple of weeks in the Bay Area involving police killings of two men suffering from mental illnesses. In one case, the family had contacted authorities to warn them ahead of time, and it still ended in tragedy.
So we know that more policing does not equal safety when it comes to mental health. We also know, sadly, that more policing does not equate safety for Black and Brown communities. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We must face the undeniable truth about police violence against Black and Brown people in our country, including in our own community. As the Pew Research Center found,
majorities of both Black and white Americans say Black people are treated less fairly than whites in dealing with the police and by the criminal justice system as a whole.
Sadly, we also cannot deny that there is a problem very specific to law enforcement officers. This survey shows that denial about racism is even worse among white police officers than in the general white population. It shows that while only 57% of all white people think our country has made the changes needed to give Black people equal rights, an overwhelming 92% of white officers think this is the case. If white police officers do not think there is a problem with racism, how will they even begin to address these very real issues we are facing? This data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics confirms what has been so obvious for so long to many people in the Black community and beyond. Namely, the police are much more likely to use force against Black people. We have so much evidence about this, but here are a few examples of what we know. Police are 4 times more likely to use force or threaten force against Black people. They are 4 times more likely to push, grab, hit, or kick Black people. And they are 8 times more likely to point or shoot a gun at Black people. Here are some other things we know about racism and policing.
Police violence is a leading cause of death for young men in the United States.
About 1 in every 1,000 Black men can expect to be killed by police.
And please note that in the 1 in 1,000 figure, it's compared to 39 in 100,000 for white men. In other words, a Black man is more than 2.5 times more likely to be killed by police than a white man.
Black women and men, and American Indian and Alaskan Native women and men are significantly more likely than white women and men to be killed by police. Latino men are also more likely to be killed by police than are white men.
We have a national epidemic of murdering Black people and other people of color by police forces across this country. You probably recognize many of the names and faces who have received national recognition, but there are countless more that you've most likely never heard of. And we must face the fact that this history of racism in the police is not only national, but also alive here in San Leandro. We have a very dark history of racism here in our city, and our history affects our reputation regionally and across the nation. In the 1970s, based on redlining and other laws, we were perceived as one of the most racist cities in America, often referred to as a, quote, sundown town, unquote. If you were not white, you better not be here after sundown. Not only that, police stationed at the Oakland border would follow Black people who came into San Leandro. And there are not just one, but two different television documentaries that look at the specific racist discrimination and housing practices that have existed in our city, one from 1971 and one in 1981. We simply cannot pretend this is not our history and simply move on. As James Baldwin famously said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced.
So we've talked about how police do not improve safety for youth, people in mental health crisis, and for Black and Brown people. We could go on to talk about how more police does not equal more safety for people without houses, for people experiencing domestic violence, and more. But we're going to move on to talk about what does keep us safe. We can reimagine public safety in San Leandro. We actually know what keeps us safe and what makes communities safer for everyone. When we invest in our community in those areas that are being starved for resources due to the overspending on the police budget, we see a huge difference. We're often asking police to handle situations for which they are not prepared. And many law enforcement officers agree that they are asked to do too much. This is our recently retired police chief, Jeff Tudor, talking at a community advisory budget task force meeting in January.
Hey, listening to some of the public comments, for the last year, and specifically around social service and not responding to mental health calls. Yeah, I'm all for it. If there's a way that our police officers do not have to go to some of these mental health calls, I'm all in. And I've actually spoke to Rob Bonta's office about this. I spoke to community members about this. I've been very open about that, hey, if there's better ways to do things, I'm all for it. But the problem is there's no systems in place to do that.
The former chief agrees that it would be better if police officers did not respond to mental health crisis calls, but says there are no other systems in place. Other systems can't be created if all the funds are going to police. So let's make some necessary changes and create these other systems that will actually keep us safer. Again, I want to emphasize that this does not have to be an us versus them approach, and it shouldn't be. We should work together in our community to come up with solutions. So let's really take a look at what we know keeps us safe. Housing, jobs, improving the physical environment, education, and healthcare. Investing in these areas will make us a safer and healthier San Leandro. So what truly reduces crime in communities and keeps us safe? Here's what we know. We know that supportive and affordable housing keeps us safe.
Increased spending on housing and community development is associated with reduced crime and reduced incarceration rates.
Violent crime rates decreased when funding was shifted to housing from corrections.
Low-income housing development in the poorest neighborhoods brings with it significant reduction in violent crime.
Homeless persons with severe mental illness placed in supportive housing experience marked reductions in shelter use, hospitalizations, length of stay per hospitalization, and time incarcerated.
What else truly keeps us safe? Jobs and economic security keep us safe. Here's what we know from studies about how jobs reduce crime rates.
Increased employment is associated with positive public safety outcomes.
Increased wages are also associated with public safety benefits.
States that had higher levels of employment also had crime rates lower than the national average.
Providing summer jobs for youth may lower violence not only during the period of employment, but afterward as well.
In addition to housing and jobs, we know that keeping buildings and community spaces in good condition keeps us safe.
Increasing the prevalence of green space in a neighborhood, improving the quality of neighborhood buildings and housing, and creating public spaces with ample lighting suitable for pedestrian traffic can be cost-effective ways of decreasing community violence.
Research in several cities shows that community-led initiatives to maintain vacant lots can decrease violence.
And there is an area of studies specifically showing the relationship between lead exposure and crime rates.
There is mounting evidence of the relationship between lead exposure and subsequent violence.
Air lead levels have a direct effect on property and violent crime rates.
We also know that high quality public education keeps us safe. Whether it's graduation rates.
Graduation rates were associated with positive public safety outcomes. Researchers have found that a 5% increase in male high school graduation rates would produce an annual savings of almost $5 billion in crime-related expenses.
The overall quality of our schools.
Improving the quality of schools attended by youth at risk for violence has been found to reduce violent crime arrests after graduation.
Policies and programs that serve to keep youth in school and specifically prevent dropout during high school for low-income youth of color are also estimated to reduce crime.
Or access to early childhood education.
Providing holistic early preschool programs and parenting support to low-income Black and Latinx children has produced sizable 25% to 33% long-run reductions in crime.
Investing in education reduces crime and makes all of us safer.
What else truly keeps us safe? We know that accessible and affordable health care keeps us safe.
Medicaid expansions led to an economically meaningful reduction in the rates of robbery, aggravated assault, and larceny theft.
Much of the crime reduction effect of Medicaid expansions likely occurred through increasing substance use disorder treatment rate and reducing substance use prevalence.
This study of access to health care and criminal behavior showed the cost savings quite clearly.
Medicaid expansions have resulted in significant decreases in annual crime. The estimated decrease in reported crime amounts to an annual cost savings of $13 billion.
And it makes sense that access to substance use treatment decreases crime, which this study showed.
An increase in the number of substance abuse treatment centers caused a reduction in both violent and financially motivated crime.
Folks, we've tried reform. We've tried training and tweaking the system, but it has not been enough. We need real change. And there are community solutions, and we can find examples right here in the Bay Area to look at for our own models. The new MH First program in Oakland, for instance, is so exciting to see as an alternative to calling the police. As described on their website, MH First, a project of the Anti-Police Terror Project, is a cutting-edge new model for non-police responses to mental health crises. MH First will respond to a range of issues, mental health crises such as psychiatric emergencies, substance use support, domestic violence situations that require victim extraction. BART is also finding creative solutions. They are now filling open officer vacancies with social workers. And there are examples from across the country where cities are redistributing their funds from police to social services, like programs in Eugene, Oregon, or Austin, Texas, or in Denver, or in Sacramento. Cities throughout the country are offering alternative visions for achieving public safety that do not involve armed police officers stepping into situations for which they are simply untrained and unprepared.
A few key points we hope you will leave with. We are not getting enough benefit from our investment in police. As we saw, a 66% increase in our police budget has given us only a 13% decrease in crime totals and much lower clearance rates for those crimes. Increased police spending does not equal increased safety. Putting the city's money in housing, jobs, community spaces, education, and healthcare will reduce crime rates. And for communities who have been historically harmed by interactions with the police, Reimagining public safety offers us an opportunity to address the impacts of racism in policing. So where do we go from here? Well, we have a few ideas. First, we think San Leandro needs to look at reallocating funds from punishment, meaning police and incarceration, to prevention, meaning healthy communities. We need to create our own new systems for responding to nonviolent calls. Don't send armed police officers. It is too risky and it's too expensive. Some might argue the newly established CAT program is already addressing these issues, and we don't need anything more. In case you haven't heard of it, CAT stands for Community Assessment and Transport Team and is run by Alameda County. While this is a nice idea, it isn't what we need. Under the CAT program, police are still the first to respond to mental health crises. Then it is left up to the police officer whether to call on the CAT team. Plus, it does not have enough staff. Another issue is that now our public safety dispatch center is part of SLPD, and they decide where a call gets routed to. They could send an ambulance, police, fire department, etc. We could look at separating the dispatch function from SLPD. There are potentially other systems in place where calls could be sent, but we're not funding them because we're spending so much of our money on the police. Another area to look at is creating meaningful civilian oversight for SLPD. Due to some hard work, including by advocates at Oversight for San Leandro, this effort is underway in San Leandro, but the City Council is deciding on what model of oversight to fund, and we need to make sure it has teeth. Join this effort by contacting Oversight for SL. There is also an open letter on oversight you can add your name to. We want to ensure an ongoing community input into the budget process. There is presently a community advisory budget task force working on some funding recommendations for the City Council. This is a short-term task force, but this type of community input needs to be part of the budget system on an ongoing basis. By the way, the budget task force is holding a town hall next Saturday on March 6th to hear community input. So join and share your priorities with the task force members. Some other ideas are re-examining police union contracts and ending qualified immunity for law enforcement, and many more. And finally, please get involved. There are a great number of local, regional, and national organizations out there that you can be part of. These are some of the different groups that you can reach out to if you want to join some of the efforts underway to create a safer San Leandro for all of us. Or start your own group if what you want to work on is not yet underway. And we're dropping links into the chat for most of these groups. The next slide shows some of the online spaces where you can keep up on what's happening in San Leandro specifically. We're also putting links for these groups in the chat. Regionally, there are a number of amazing organizations that surround us here in the Bay Area that you can become involved with or donate money to or otherwise support as we try to reimagine a community that is safe for all of us. Here are just a few suggestions. And again, see the chat for links. And finally, nationally, there are many, many more inspiring organizations that you can be part of, and many of them provide great resources for creating local change. If you're wondering what you can do as an individual, here are some suggestions. Of course, you can join one of the groups already working to make change in San Leandro. You can attend city council meetings and make public comments, or write to the city council members to share your opinions. You can find information on meetings on San Leandro Meeting Central, and you can find the contact info for all city council members on the San Leandro website. You can write letters to the San Leandro Times, sign the oversight letter, join the Budget Task Force Town Hall on 3/6 and voice your opinion. And maybe most importantly, you can help change hearts and minds by talking with your friends, family, and neighbors. You don't need to be an expert. You just have to care and want to learn and help others learn. If you need help connecting with any of the local groups or just want to reach out, please do. Here is our email. Also, if you have questions that we might be able to answer in a follow-up webinar, please send them along. We know we didn't cover everything. It's not possible. and we would love to keep this conversation going.
At the end of the day, budgets are moral documents, and how we choose to spend our money says a great deal about what we value as citizens, what we care about. And we hope all of you here today will join us in looking at a new way for San Leandro to proceed moving forward. We have an opportunity to do things differently. Please join us in that effort. We can do this. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to partnering with you in the future to create a healthier, safer San Leandro. Thanks.